This week I was fortunate enough to be able to share one of my favorite games, Desolation, with some people that I enjoy watching and communicating with in the RPG brigade or community or whatever. So I got to play Desolation with Dungeon Master 5.0 and Same Old G and Natural 20 Games and Gothnog. Same Old G's recent and supposedly final video about Shadowrun, his vehicular combat video from yesterday. That game and that particular video helped coalesce some thoughts I had been having about systems. Now, we describe systems in a lot of different ways, light or crunchy or narrative or simulationist or, whatever, and I do not want to go there today. What I want to get out is maybe basic, maybe not. For me, systems are there to facilitate resolutions. That's really what they're there for. They do a lot of other things, but you engage the system in order to determine outside of your own head what happens. It's the difference between simply pretending and playing a role-playing game. But the way that we can achieve results, the way that we can determine results, definitely has an impact on the type of game you're playing and the type of gamer to whom it will appeal. For some of us, having a game master there to decide if something does or doesn't happen, or to interpret a result through a very, very simple die roll, like basically a yes-no resolution, is enough. But for some of us, it isn't enough. For some of us to feel like the time that we're investing in the game to, solve problems or to create these fictional relationships and move through these emerging stories, for some of us, things like charts are necessary, or miniatures, or modifiers, or a great long list of things which impact on our decisions. So while we could simply have a character in a conflict, let's say a physical conflict, right? So a character could have a fight score, could roll a single die and be successful on their fight, and therefore we could narrate the entire combat off of that one roll, knowing that in the end, no matter what happens in the way we narrate it, such as, the character being on the rocks all the way through but squeaking out a victory at the end, if they succeed on that die roll, they'll win, and we have complete freedom to narrate in and around that win-lose resolution, all of which could happen off to the side on a single die roll. Whereas another group would just not feel satisfied, would not feel engaged, or would not feel like anything was really happening unless their decisions about which weapons they had chosen and how much armor they were wearing and what position they were occupying in the room and if there was cover or no cover and how the light level affected things. Unless these things were taken into account for a series of die rolls to represent their character's ability in this fight, they couldn't really take it seriously. Right? And of course, these situations reverse. The group that really responds to the simple single die roll with heavy narration would find it very difficult or even ridiculous to put yourself through so much work to resolve something that could be much more engaging or much more cinematic or much more imaginative if you didn't have to expend so much brain power calculating or adding or looking things up in tables and charts. All right, so this is that conflict of culture, this conflict of gaming culture. Obviously, there are enough of us out there to support all of these different approaches that we have games that take these different steps or try to merge them in some way and create some kind of overlap or common ground. What it strikes me is that a lot of these things are exactly the same. But It depends on how much we want to externalize and how much we want to have external verification of the process. And that brings us again to intention. It brings us to the way that we bring the game to life around us. What kind of game or what kind of experience are we intending to create? Are we sitting down just to enjoy a story and contribute little pieces to it? Or are we sitting down to exercise our decision-making ability? Or are we sitting down to stroke our ego in some way? Or are we sitting down to collaboratively create something which didn't exist before, or to spout some awesome lines of dialogue, or to make the table laugh, or to ad infinitum? So many different things that different players bring to the table, all of us trying to interact with similar game systems. But even that one die roll simple game or the 50 die roll complicated game, I see as being the same thing. How do we get from complication to a resolution? And what do we, as the people imagining that situation, need in order to feel satisfied by this as a pastime? One of the interesting things about some complicated games, even games that have no intention of being role-playing games, as we mentioned before, like Battletech, right? What is basically an on-the-table skirmish game, miniatures, versus miniatures, die rolls, charts, all to determine what happens in, this futuristic mech battle. These games have a notorious ability to register on a very real level with the players, and this emergent property of characterization and personalization and association starts to take place, and so a role-playing game sprung up around the activity. And we'll see the same thing happen with Leviathans, and we've seen the same thing happen with Starfleet battles, and on and on. All these games spawn role-playing games because something about the mental involvement in the battles or in the scenarios creates attachment. And that attachment or engagement is really what I see as the core of the role-playing experience. It doesn't matter if you're in a very, very light game or in a very, very heavy game. At a certain point, after a chain of decisions, you start to grow attached to the momentum of the story and the momentum of the character and things like that. So I find this all very, very interesting, especially when I hear things like, this game is too complicated, it breaks my immersion. And of course, the opposite is too simple, I can't take it seriously. Finding the way into the mechanics to react to the game the way it was intended, or to react to the game the way that people who enjoy it do, this is a gaming skill also. We all have preferences, and why not enjoy those preferences? But we don't have to be a slave to our preferences either. One of the things that hooked me on Ubiquity in the first place was that it could be as crunchy or light as I needed it to be without requiring house rules or really modifying how the game system actually works. I mean, it's designed from the get-go to stay out of the way and resolve issues that you need dice for. Players get to make a decision about whether or not they will roll the dice, and they don't have to worry about that decision impacting on how much external verification there is of their character's achievement in the game. Right? So if someone doesn't care about that, if they just want to know if they can go forward with a description or not, then the game system works for them. They can take the average. They don't really need to roll the dice unless the game master is specifically calling for the kind of tension that a die roll can create. And the game master, similarly, doesn't have to roll any dice ever and not have to worry about screwing the players or making an arbitrary decision or whatever. The game system will be supplying consistent results all the way through, and no one has to really worry about it. So that I see as a real strength of system. Taking that even farther, the game system can expand to accommodate, again, within the rules as written, to allow for pooled results to take place. So in the example that same old G was talking about with Shadowrun, where each driver in the vehicle chase needs to make a check. And so if you have, 3 drivers on one side and they're being pursued by like 5 villains on motorcycles, you'd have 8 checks to make every turn, each with modifiers. And, well, for those of us with a history of a different style of gaming or whatever it is, this doesn't seem like all that daunting a process, but I'm sure even people with that kind of experience would not want such a car chase to last for very many turns, especially if there was a lot of variety of action. Speeds kept changing, if the number of vehicles kept changing, and if, cars are breaking off and moving back together again. If it was a very mutable environment, it's a lot of modifiers to handle, and not everybody is in the mood to do that all the time. But there are some people who would never try, and there are some people who want to do it as a big showcase, and some people who just do it as a matter of course because it's really not that hard. A game like Ubiquity can accommodate all of those people. It can be compressed down into a single role. It can be compressed down into one role for one side. Or it can be allowed to run as a single role for each individual, and it can be expanded up to include individual roles for single people with lots of detailed modifiers. The system allows for all of these things, and this is what I see as the future of game design. The more that we talk about games, the more that we play games, the more that we get inside the head of the people who enjoy those games, the more we'll be able to take very simple mechanics and apply them in a way that works for us right now without breaking the consistency of that game. And it doesn't have to come down to narrative style games or heavy mechanical games. With a little awareness, games can actually fit more than one role all at the same time.